This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. My name is Kate Jenkinson, and I am your host for this wonderful 8-part series, Neurodiversity in the Workplace, where, along with my guests, we explore the rapidly developing landscape that is neurodiversity in work. My guests are industry leaders, coaches, and business founders who share their passion, knowledge, and the real-life situations and scenarios from their own practical lived experience. Together, we examine the complexity of the workplace for those who experience the world differently. Whether you're a business owner, leader, coach, or trainer, these conversations highlight how you can make a difference to everyone's working world by looking at life through a neurodivergent lens. I am delighted to have on the podcast today Ellie Hand, who's Senior HR Advisor and Training Lead at Bhayani HR and Employment Law. So welcome, Ellie, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and such an exciting and interesting topic for us to speak about and to share with the wider community, because it really is one that, whilst we've seen things evolve over time, it's still one that's such an important conversation that everybody needs to be having just to ensure that we can continue to move with that time. So thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely welcome. I know you and I have met at various events, and we've always enjoyed our conversation. So I'm delighted that you said yes and you're happy to continue to have that conversation here.
Absolutely.
I thought we could start with just introducing who you are and what you do and why this is something you're so passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, I work for Bhayani HR and Employment Law, and I work within our HR advice team, but I also deliver and lead on the firm's training. So at Bhayani Law, we obviously support organisations when it comes to everything from a HR and employment law world. But our main focus is not so much the legalities of what businesses should and shouldn't do, but actually focusing on that softer side of culturally and best practice wise, what should we do to make you a better organisation? And that's a real key focus of ours and of mine. And then that's where I try and do some of that from my training point of view as well, is giving managers, organisations the skills to be able to manage their staff in the best way possible, but thinking of these little nuances and the new little bits that we're getting to grips with, particularly again with neurodiversity at work. And it's a new thing that people don't really have much education around, but they need education around it to move with the times and to support their employees. So that's a little bit, I suppose, of a background of what we do and where my focus sits.
I love that actually, because when I was working in HR, it was always the culture and the values that mattered to me. You mentioned them being the soft side. Actually, I feel that they are the hardest side for people to understand, because they're not as tangible, are they? And particularly neurodiversity, because it's been hidden for so long and yet it's been there. So how have you seen the interest develop in this space over the last few years?
Yes, I suppose at Bhayani Law, and then both personally for myself and speaking with friends, family, connections, I've seen a noticeable shift probably over the last decade from neurodiversity being misunderstood, overlooked, to now becoming a little bit more of a central part of organisations' EDI strategies. Whilst, yes, initially the legal discussions focused purely on the disability discrimination side of things under the Equality Act, because to be completely frank and honest, that's where people feel comfortable because they have a legal framework, they have a piece of legislation that they can work to. But now what I'm seeing, and I think it's a real positive thing, is organisations are starting to recognise that actually neurodiversity isn't just a legal issue. It's about creating an environment where all minds can thrive, regardless of where that thrive sits. There's sort of a growing awareness that conditions such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia and others aren't problems to fix, is what I've heard in the past.
That's music to my ears,
Yeah.
Ellie, honestly. Because sometimes I feel working as a coach, I get to see the difficult end of that spectrum where people are really struggling to be understood. And so to hear you say you've seen that shift and people are interested in the person in this situation rather than the legal risk, that's really interesting that you're seeing that.
I still think we have a long way to go. I don't think we're there. I still think there's a journey that we have to go on. But I do think I've seen more clients being proactive in seeking guidance on things like inclusive recruitment, adjustments that they can make, the training that they can give to both their staff and their managers, which is really encouraging. And I don't think businesses have ever thought, I don't want to deal with that, or...
No.
But I think people have almost had an element of anxiety and fear through what happens if everything goes wrong.
Yes.
Because there's been that legal framework that's been so heavily focused on, I think people have felt nervous, and it's not something to feel nervous about. It's actually, let's go on that journey together. And there's organisations like us at Bhayani Law. There's individuals like yourself, Kate, who is an incredible coach on that side. I hope you don't mind me saying, obviously from the neurodivergent side of things as well, you are somebody who can support businesses and individuals to really help them grow. So with businesses like us and with people like you, it's only going to evolve further and just help businesses to understand.
Well, that's made me feel very happy. Well, it's a partnership, isn't it? It's no one person has got the answer to everything on this.
No.
And I think that's why it's been such a joy to be having the chance to speak to different people around their perspective of neurodiversity in the workplace. You bring that more holistic view. What I've just heard you say, you've talked about employers recognising a need to do something in the recruitment space, in the training space. So that is fantastic. I'm very excited about what's to come.
I think recruitment is a really big focus for organisations at the minute, because I think, yes, COVID was a long time ago, but I think businesses have realised post-COVID that actually it's about having the right people in the right seats. It's not just about bums on seats anymore, and it's not just about filling that gap. And I think businesses have seen that, and they've grown as a result of the challenges that they faced through that really awful period where things were really challenging. And again, a lot of businesses are going through that challenging time at the minute with the cost of living, the national insurance increases, the contributions that they're paying. So I think the conversations around inclusive recruitment and adjustments and training is ever evolving, because they understand that need to have people that are actually going to work with the business and work for the business and grow that, rather than just come in and do what they need to do day in, day out.
Well, I can remember a long time ago when I was doing the recruitment, we used to work on supporting managers' misconceptions around people who had disabilities, and the evidence showed that if you hired somebody with a disability, their loyalty was so much greater than somebody without. Do you think there are common misconceptions still that employers have around neurodiversity?
Absolutely. And I think that's one that's been bred and born from historic things that you've just spoken about there. And I think until we see a complete culture shift, they're always going to be there. I think one of the biggest and most common misconceptions that I see personally is that unless an employer has a formal diagnosis or an employee discloses it, the employer has no duty to act.
Yeah.
But in reality, the Equality Act does say that employers have a duty to make reasonable adjustments as soon as they know, or could reasonably be expected to know, that somebody might be disabled. So that's one of the biggest sort of misconceptions that we see.
I'm interested in that. If you take the statistics that 20% of people probably have some kind of neurodivergent condition, so it's a hidden disability. If you look at your numbers of staff, say you employ 20, then that would suggest that wasn't a great mathematical decision, was it, Kate? So you're going to have you're going to have a handful of neurodivergent people in your organisation. So does that mean you have to make adjustments even if you don't know who is neurodivergent?
I suppose that is another misconception that we see, is that when we look at statistics such as 1 in 20 or 20% of our organisation, we think that we have to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to treat everybody the same in line with the word equality. And we take a one-size-fits-all approach to adjustments. A lot of businesses at the minute are going down the line of, flexible working is the answer. Everybody wants flexible working. And I think they think that for somebody who's neurodivergent as well. But actually, employers need to think about it slightly differently. A lot of organisations view adjustments as costly.
Yeah.
They see them as a bit of a burden sometimes, when often small changes, such as how you deliver feedback to a person or adjusting the sensory environment, make the biggest sort of differences. So I suppose for yourself there, do you have to make adjustments, or is it something that you should consider? The answer is no, you don't have to, but if you notice that somebody requires an adjustment or just that smallest tweak to that person's working day or working environment will help them thrive in that environment, I don't see why organisations wouldn't do those things. And like I said, it's thinking outside. I think we all sometimes get ourselves so embedded and we put ourselves in a little box and we're too worried to take one step outside of that box, to think outside of it and think, actually, what suits this person? It might be outside of the ordinary. It might be something we've never tried before. But if it suits them and it suits their needs and it helps both parties, because don't forget, it is a two-way street, why not give things a go?
I agree with you. Of course I do. I've always enjoyed helping people find a way to thrive. Now as a coach, it's kind of what I do. But even as an HR professional, I used to love to understand the differences that people had around communication needs. And I think one of the things I heard you say there was, the feedback mechanism is so important. And it's so easy to adjust, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people get anxious about giving and receiving feedback. There's a lot of training on it. Is there a little hint or tip you could share with us on that, Ellie? I'd love to know what you do. I'll put you on the spot a bit, but I've gone, I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is so important and feedback can change everything. I once spoke to an employee who had been told once that they were too happy.
Oh, no.
And that was the feedback that they'd been given. And I thought,
oh, my goodness.
Okay. So, how does that digest? But actually what the business will probably meaning is in certain situations, somebody's smile, like for example, I use this as a really silly example, but if you're disciplining somebody, if you were to smile in that meeting and that's a personality trait, it's not fantastic, is it?
No.
But it's the way it's delivered. And for me, I think there's a lot of value in asking the person how they would like to receive feedback and also how they would like to give feedback to others. And I think there's real value in getting to know the individuals that you're working with, because some individuals do like really direct instruction. They like really direct feedback, and that's okay. So there's nothing wrong with direct constructive feedback, but it has to be feedback that person is going to be able to understand and digest.
And do something about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have heard of this model yourself, Kate, but I typically go by the model of SBI, so it's called Situation Behaviour Impact, where I will always describe the situation, because I think a lot of people sometimes want to know, where's your feedback coming from?
Absolutely they do, yeah, because they can't ground it in what actually happened. There's so much misunderstanding between individuals, neurodivergent or not, that unless you describe the situation, people can't understand what happened.
Absolutely. It's the situation, where did it happen, when did it happen? But then I want to know, okay, so if you're giving me feedback on this, what is it about what I've done or the work that I've produced? What behaviour are you referring to? I think sometimes people will make one-off comments such as, you were being lazy. Was I being lazy, or did the report that I gave you just miss key data that you wanted? Is that actually the point that you're referring to?
Yes.
And I think for someone that's neurodivergent, obviously bringing it back to the reason for the podcast, that is ever so important in terms of providing that specific thing, because they need that to be able to digest the feedback. Giving quite loose, quite damaging conversation.
I've got a personal example of this, Ellie. I did a report for the business and I got the feedback that there were errors all over it, which was quite damaging personally. And for somebody who's neurodivergent, taking criticism like that is really hard. You go into a rejection sensitive loop.
Yeah.
And then when I actually found the facts around that, the errors were double spaces between the end of a sentence and the beginning of another one. So you couldn't even see them, was my thing.
Yeah.
Is that these errors were in the grammar and the layout, not in the content. And so that specific feedback is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's describing that. So again, telling you there's errors all over this report, that makes you feel, and like you say, it makes you retract. It makes you go into that element of negativity. But saying something such as, the detail was great, Kate, but at the end of the sentences, you did put a double space, and that's something that we just need to look to rectify for the future to ensure that it's easy to read for the reader. That in itself is specific, describing your behaviour, but it's also giving that impact as to how is that impacting you as a person, but how is it also impacting for the reader, for the organisation, for the team? And that's really key for me.
People often miss the impact out, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
Thank you for that. I love models. As somebody who's a poet, I love things when they are broken down in a memorable way like that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit about making these kind of adjustments, so make the feedback clearer. What happens if people don't take this action and people have asked for something or needed something? What's the legal perspective on that?
Yeah, so I suppose the legal risk is clear in that individuals could have claims for failure to make reasonable adjustment, discrimination arising from a disability, harassment in some circumstances, all of which can lead to tribunal claims, reputational damage, and costly settlements for organisations. But for me, it goes a little bit beyond the legalities. As I said to you right at the start of the podcast, we've got that legal framework, but I believe there's quite a significant commercial risk for organisations in that if neurodivergent staff feel excluded, they feel unsupported, businesses are going to lose valuable talent, they're going to lose innovation and insight. We've supported clients with grievances, with resignations, even sometimes whistleblowing complaints off the back of poor neuro-inclusion practices. A lot of businesses they have an element of reactivity rather than being proactive in that area, which hurts the culture and the morale and the retention across the board. So I suppose there's absolutely legal risk, but for me, I like to think about it. Again, I don't like to stay in my little box.
That's good.
I like to think outside of my little box. And I think commercially, there's a bigger risk for organisations that if you don't start to think slightly more neuro-inclusive, if you're not thinking of making these adjustments, you're going to lose such important talent, innovation and growth for the business.
Yeah. I think that was the thing that used to frustrate me, is that if we just followed one set process and said that is the way it's always been done or that's the way to do it, we'd lose the opportunity to change with whatever's happening in the environment, not just for employees but for customers as well, because of course neurodivergent people are customers as well as employees, aren't they? So it is a reputational situation.
Absolutely.
Interesting. I like that you like to be outside your box, Ellie. Whatever that box is.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And everyone does say, who I work with internally, they always say, oh, Ellie's there again with her ideas, or we're thinking about different things that we can do. But it's just because I'm so passionate about not secluding or not creating an environment that not everybody can thrive in. And I think that's what makes the differences for businesses. And I think that's what sets you aside from being an organisation that just ticks along and is seen as a good place to be, but it doesn't set you aside from the crowd, and it doesn't make you that fantastic organisation that you want to be with.
Well, this is kind of why I wanted to speak to you, because I can feel that actually. I can see it and feel it in your organisation, that there's this energy, there's this positive enthusiasm for innovation and growth. And I can see, you actually do what you say. So that's lovely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of culture, beyond compliance, if you like, in your training work, how do you help organisations move beyond that sort of tick in the legal box? How do you get that genuine impact?
I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it doesn't take buy-in, because it does.
Yes, absolutely.
And you'll know that yourself in terms of you've got to explain the importance. But one of my, again, passions and what I tend to do is I tend to encourage a leader to start with empathy, not always compliance. So in my training sessions and in training sessions that other individuals run across the place of work, we tend to share real world scenarios, which I know you've heard plenty of from myself.
I love your case studies.
Case studies that humanise the issue. I think that's really, really important, including positive stories where neurodivergent employees can thrive with the right support. But I also like to challenge the assumptions, the unconscious bias that helps teams to think differently about the way they communicate, about the way they manage somebody's performance, and often what good looks like. And I think people, for me, we focus so heavily on statistics or the wrong output. Sometimes the input's forgotten about. So I think it's about equipping managers with the confidence to have open, respectful conversations and not just referring to policy all the time. Neuro-inclusion isn't about perfection, it's about progress, it's about a mind shift, and it's about ensuring that we have accountability at every level, and we're just happy to get on that journey.
Yeah. You said lots of things there I want to explore, actually, Ellie. You talked about starting with empathy and getting buy-in from that point of view. Yeah. Buy-in is so critical. When we've been talking to our other guests, it's hard to get a culture shift without buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the first thing I noticed. So what would you add on that? Somebody inside an organisation, whoever you partner with, how can they help to get that leadership buy-in?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is the way in which you communicate why you're doing these things and why it is such an important factor for the organisation. I often say when you tell your child they must do something, they often do the opposite. Yeah, and I do genuinely lead with that in leadership as well. When we tell somebody that they have to do something, they often see that the negative impact on that. So I think having that conversation, that communication, and explaining why. And I find that with a neurodivergent individual as well that you support, they often want to know the why. They often want to know why this is happening, why we're doing something. So why not start with that?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I've got a perspective on that because alongside being neurodivergent, there can be something called demand avoidance, which is exactly as you just said. If something becomes a command or a demand, some people intuitively then can't switch on to doing that. The motivation to take that action is lost. And so actually having a common why we're doing something is really important. I'm actually rereading that book, Simon Sinek's Start With Why at the moment.
There you go.
There you go, you see.
Yeah, you're right. It is so important because I just think if individuals understand the why, even if they don't always agree with it, which not everybody does, because it's really important to remember that not everybody has to agree with why we're doing something. But if you can help them connect and understand the purpose, the buy-in and the want to do that is significantly greater.
Yeah. And then the other thing you said that was really interesting is unconscious bias. Just tease that out a little bit. How does that show up specifically with neurodiversity in the workplace? What do you notice?
With the unconscious bias side of things, I think everybody has opinions, and everybody has opinions based on things they've seen in the media.
Oh, yeah.
Things they've read in books, things they've heard other people say. So often, obviously, unconscious bias is unknowingly taking a certain type of action or unknowingly making a decision where we didn't know it's going to impact that person. And quite often, it's because we've not thought about it.
Yeah, true.
People don't give themselves that time to digest and think. So I think sometimes we make an assumption that somebody can't do something because they're neurodivergent, but it's because we've not explored it. It's because we've not asked them. It's because we've not sat down and gone through that. We've just assumed or thought that it's not going to be for them, or it's not going to be something they want to engage in, but it's just because we've not explored it.
Yeah. There's something about that collaborative approach, isn't there, to getting goals or outputs that people understand and do make the right impact. And then the final thing you said that was really interesting, I know you've got some stories on this, is we focus on the wrong output and we forget what the input is. As an HR person, that really used to frustrate me, that we were measuring things and it's like, why are we actually measuring this? Because it's making people do the opposite of what we want. Do you have an example that you could share?
Yeah. It is so frustrating. I mean, I think I see a lot of the time businesses focusing on money and focusing on the cost of things, or focusing on how much somebody's brought into the organisation. I suppose from a sales point of view, you're often going to focus on, just using sales as an example, you're going to focus on how many clients somebody's converted, not the background work that's gone into that conversion or why perhaps they haven't been converted. And that for me is where organisations get their metrics wrong and where we're looking at the wrong things, because we're constantly focusing on, okay, what did that achieve, rather than what did the person put in to help achieve it get there, or what were the missing steps in between, why did we get there in the first place. So I think we often go for the easiest things to look at. And I think one that always makes me laugh and one that I always think about is when somebody goes, oh, they're so busy, they've got back-to-back meetings. And I think, okay, that might be really, really important. I'm really pleased that their diary is full from 9 till 5, but it doesn't mean they are doing something and that work is meaningful. They might be procrastinating. They might just be blocking out their diary. And then another one that really frustrates me is where people take a bit of time out. So a lot of businesses and organisations think somebody going for a walk on their lunch or taking a 5-minute decompression break is a negative. And I think, no, you're letting that person collect their thoughts. You're letting them have that break to be able to input the best that they need to. So that's something else, I suppose, that frustrates me sometimes.
I do some work around creativity, and the reality is if people don't take that time out and away from the screen and that walk in nature, then they're not engaging their creative thinking. So yeah, it means they might be very productive, but they might be doing something that's just the same old.
Just building on that a little bit in terms of why organisations are so reluctant, I suppose, sometimes to build that change and genuinely focus on a cultural shift beyond that tick box of compliance, is because they don't feel that they can afford it, or they don't feel it's an importance for them as an organisation. But there are businesses out there are organisations that I work with as an individual that fund this stuff for your organisation because they want to see that culture shift. They want to see that change. You and I both know that there's fantastic organisations across the South Yorkshire region in particular that will help businesses to part fund or fully fund training on being more neuro-inclusive, on what is neurodiversity, what can this do for your organisation.
Yeah, people aren't alone, are they? This is the thing.
Absolutely not.
Comes back to that collaboration, and hopefully listeners will hear that there's ways to do that might be a little bit different. Coming back to the impact for neurodiversity in the workplace, where do you think that culture shift could really help for neuro-inclusion?
I suppose, again, it's a really difficult one. And I think it comes back round to that question of it's the mindset shift that we have to focus on.
Yeah.
And the accountability at every level. We have to bear in mind that we're not all perfect. We can't all do everything, and we're not all going to wake up tomorrow and be experts, or listeners listening to this podcast aren't going to think, oh, I understand everything now. Because that isn't the way things work. It's challenging the assumptions. It's leading with the empathy. It's, as you say, getting that collaboration right, thinking about the communication, and that's where the culture shift will come from. But you need the buy-in from the top of an organisation to be able to move the culture shift. And that's the difference for neurodivergent individuals, is getting people who understand.
Thanks, Ellie. And just to make it even more complicated now, the idea of intersectionality and bias comes up. As an HR professional, I used to see this quite a lot, and I'm interested in your perspective on that. What would you say the challenges are for neurodivergent individuals when it's compounded by things like race, gender, or other intersecting identities?
Intersectionality is the missing piece.
Okay.
It's something that, again, I think we don't talk about very frequently because people don't have the education around it. And you said it yourself, I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated now. And it is that in itself. I think people shy away from addressing the barriers because they feel it's too complicated. For example, research does actually show that Black women with ADHD are less likely to be diagnosed or believed and face higher levels of disciplinary action and performance concerns as a result of that lack of diagnosis.
Oh my goodness.
It's hard to believe. And like you say, saying something like, oh my goodness, you're shocked by the research and what the stats show, but they do genuinely show that. When I'm advising my clients, when I'm reviewing policies, procedures, I encourage them to look beyond the generic diversity pledges and ensure that their practices are responsive to lived experience. I'm a real big believer on that lived experience, and that means sort of considering who's at the table when you're making these decisions.
Yes.
Review the data that you have on grievances that you've had in your organisation, exits that you've had from your organisation, and create that safe route for people to speak up without the fear. And I don't like this word, but I use it because everybody uses it, without being labelled or misunderstood. And that is really key. It's focusing on who's there at the time when you're making these decisions, and not following the crowd, because as we said earlier on, and I know sometimes I get word vomit, but as we said earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's what organisations need to remember.
Yeah.
It's focusing on who's at the table when you're making the decisions and why you're making them.
I think that's so important because we've seen some of the awful mistakes that have got through, haven't we? Some of them are funny on the social media, and you think, oh, we would never do that. And yet I'm trying to think now. I mean, I made a mistake once, more than once, let's be honest. But the one I'm thinking of was on my social media. I put an article out there, just a post out there, and I used the puzzle piece as a sort of logo for neuro-inclusion, neurodiversity. And that isn't accepted in the community because it can be referenced as people who are neurodivergent have a piece missing. And that's like not the metaphor I wanted to have people imagine. So I am super cautious around using puzzle pieces sometimes for neurodiversity and neuro-inclusion. But yeah, those lived experiences are so important to include. How can organisations do that if they don't have diagnoses, if people haven't come forward and said, you know, I'm neurodivergent? How can they include that perspective?
I suppose I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point.
No, it's fine. It's obviously an important point.
It is that communication and that collaboration. Organisations shouldn't do things or implement policies without the collaboration of teams or without really important workplace champions is what I would call them. So individuals who you want to engage with on that journey, focus groups. I think when you make decisions without data and when you make decisions without individuals' input, that's where it's likely that you would make a mistake or you would do something wrong. But if you include individuals who have that knowledge, or you include and ask for lived experience, you open that door for people to communicate and to speak up without that fear of being labelled or misunderstood. That's what's going to help organisations.
And I'm just thinking back to the times when I was trying to put that into practice in organisations. So before there being neuro-inclusion and sort of community groups, or ERGs, I think as they're called now, we had something called a communication forum, which was those workplace champions that you've just said. And we would run past a group of selected, and we didn't select them, they were selected by their peers, just run past the changes that we were making as an organisation, or kind of get feedback from people about what they liked or didn't like. So I think you're absolutely right, Ellie. It's getting that feedback. Let's come back to feedback.
Yeah.
One of the questions I used to ask myself as an HR director is, who are we missing? I was always interested in getting as many different perspectives on big challenges or changes as possible. So maybe those questions, podcast listeners can take some of those and use them.
Absolutely. I think it's all the C's. It's the collaboration, it's the communication, it's making sure it's clear, it's concise, it's all those things that we need to be thinking about, and that's what will make us have a successful output with a lot of organisations.
I love the fact that you said all the C's. I don't suppose you'd be surprised that I once wrote a poem with all the C's in it to encourage this. I'm not going to share it today, but the C's are good mostly.
Yes. The appropriate C's is what we should be using.
We're now going to get people going, oh, what about this C? And please keep that creative thinking going. We love it. That's another C for you.
Yeah, there you go.
So it is complex out there when you consider all the possible intersectionalities. But like you said, use the C's and think about what your workplace champions might be able to bring. I like that. It's always something that can get missed out in the conversation is how equipped are our managers. They're in the middle of all of this and often get, I think, forgotten about. I've heard a phrase, the squashed middle. They're getting it from the top, they're getting it from the side, they're getting it from the employees, and then HR are sort of kind of giving it them as well. So what could we do differently to support managers who are struggling with neurodiversity in the workplace?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I do a lot of line management training, and one thing that I will always say at the start of the sessions is you as a manager are placed into quite a difficult position as an individual because you're expected to manage people, you're expected to be the linchpin of this organisation and the way things work, but you often don't have the skill always to be able to do that because individuals are often placed into management roles because of their skill to do the job, not their skill to manage the staff team that sit within. It's really difficult. Legally, they have to understand what reasonable adjustments are and how to spot when somebody needs support, even without somebody coming forward and disclosing it. And I suppose that is the C's that we've just talked about. I'm going to bring them up again is communicating, collaborating, understanding your team, allowing them to be creative, but think about the way you're giving the feedback, and that's what's going to help you to understand what support they need and why they need it. And I suppose that's from a legal point of view.
Yeah, and the thing is, I know when I was working with managers, it's like, you're right, it's spotting the moments when they need to either have a conversation or ask someone else for support. So they don't have to have all the answers, do they? It's not about them knowing everything.
And I suppose that's where you come from, has a switch from the legal understanding to a human point of view as well.
Yeah.
In that if managers create that psychological safety, they're approachable, they're flexible, they're willing to adapt, that's going to help. I always say, ask, don't assume. And that is a really big one for me, where a small check-in conversation, a co-created support plan can make the real difference. And it goes without saying, of course, that documentation is really, really key. One of my golden rules in HR.
Oh, here we go. Write it all down.
If it's not written down, it doesn't happen. But it's got to be done clearly and sensitively. So there's a record of the support that's been offered, but also the support that's been agreed. And that helps managers to recognise when they're potentially being biased or recognising that responding rather than reacting is really key. And that's the difference that really helps them.
Well, you've brought up the topic of documentation, and I'm curious about this one because sometimes employees are better at documenting things than managers.
Yeah.
So what's a simple way of doing that, or an easy way to, in the spirit of supporting neuro-inclusion and making sure that if reasonable adjustments are there, that they are put into practice? What can managers do about that?
Again, I suppose it is based on each and every organisation and doing something that suits you as a manager. And again, it's about the person. So having something formally documented and placed on a HR file may create anxieties for somebody who's neurodivergent. So therefore, that may not be the best way to document things. Perhaps a diary that you might have, or through a HR system where you can put file notes on somebody's file so that you've got that gentle reminder, is the best way to do things. So it has to be individualised to that person and to the situation. But I think there's no harm in quick follow-up emails that take a couple of seconds after you've had a conversation with someone, just so that they know that you've listened to them. They know the support that you're going to put in place, And you know, as a manager as well, you've got that protection for you because you have documented it. You'll know this as well, Kate. I can't tell you how many people I speak to when they say, I did do it though. I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry, but we need the confirmation of that. And it is very much about protecting you, but evidencing that for your employees. And I think that's so important for someone that's neurodivergent as well, because the wishy-washy conversations that are left open-ended that aren't documented are actually really unhelpful for somebody who's neurodivergent.
The thing is, one of my lived experiences is that I can remember conversations. So I can remember what was said, but through my training, I always wrote notes of things. I listen by writing. So, it's something I have as already predisposed to do this. But yeah, it's not easy for managers. I appreciate that. And also for neurodivergent people, sometimes it can feel disingenuous, not as though it's done with the right intentions. So it's getting that balance right. There is, again, no one right answer to this.
Yeah.
It's what works in the culture that people are trying to create. It's brilliant. Thank you.
There's a big piece around, active listening as well.
Yeah.
And that comes around to the C's. And I think we focus a little bit too much sometimes on the words that come out of our mouth because they're often the first things that are heard.
Yeah.
But actually, your body language, the tone of voice that you use, the location as to where you've had that meeting, or the layout of the room in which you're having a meeting is so, so important when we're thinking about these things. Because if you sat me down and wanted to have a really supportive conversation with me, but you did it in quite a formal setting with a table in the middle of us where we're sat opposite and you've got your arms folded, I'm not really getting that supportive, encouraging environment from you.
Yeah.
I'm actually getting, you don't really want to be there, but you have to be.
Yeah. And interesting for neurodivergent people as well, I've heard that organisations tend to hold these meetings in rooms with bright lights or a lot of noise, and the environment is already stressful for somebody. So it's making sure that you've got the right situation for having that conversation.
It's how do you get to that conversation? Because again, saying to somebody, oh, can I speak to you for just one moment? That can be quite negative, because if they don't know that conversation that you're about to have with them and they've not had the ability to plan, they've not had the ability to think about what it is, they're going to be filled with so much anxiety. They're actually not listening to you as part of that conversation anyway, because their mind is somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they're too worried about the fact that you've pulled them into that meeting. So that's a really big part of it as well, which you'll know yourself, Kate.
I do. I mean, I've made that mistake myself several times, and I know how I feel when people say that to me. So yeah, but it's done with the right intent. I think we can ask some of these closing questions now. So I guess I'm going to lean into the employment law side now, Ellie. Is there anything that is coming up in terms of changes or trends that you think it would be useful for people to know about, particularly for supporting neurodivergent staff?
Everybody talks about employment law changes, and with the recent government change, it's probably not that recent anymore, but I think everybody fears the Employment Rights Bill that's going to come into place. But from an Equality Act point of view and from a neurodivergent staff point of view, there aren't actually any specific changes that are currently planned for that. But what we are seeing is we're seeing a shift in how employment tribunals are interpreting what's considered to be reasonable, particularly around adjustment during recruitment, performance management. There's also sort of a wider trend of employees incorporating neurodiversity into ESG wellbeing strategies.
Oh, good.
And we expect that to continue, which is a real positive. The government consultations, the workplace charters are pushing for more inclusive employment practices, especially in the public and the larger corporate sectors, which again is a real positive. But for legal changes specifically around the Equality Act and neurodiversity, there isn't that much, but there are other changes coming in employment law that may impact businesses' ability to be able to manage staff and things that they have to consider. But I won't go into that because honestly, we could have another full podcast on the legislative changes.
Yeah, no. I like that you shared the sort of trends, because that's really interesting that it's being incorporated in wellbeing strategies. Are you able to give me a little bit more about that? Because that sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I think the wellbeing strategies that businesses are looking at the minute, obviously menopause has always been quite a high one on the list, but again, not something that is necessarily related to this. But I think from a wellbeing point of view, we're thinking about that work-life balance. We're thinking about what adjustments we can make to add to people's environments to ensure that they feel comfortable. We are thinking about those inclusive recruitment strategies which help towards somebody's well-being in the place of work. A lot of businesses are engaging with EAP systems more and more.
Good, yeah.
So employee assistance programs, which we perhaps haven't seen in the past because it's been seen as quite a significant cost. But a lot of businesses are now doing it as a benefit to their staff, which is really key.
Honestly, when you look at the cost of an EAP compared to the cost of a tribunal, I'd challenge any organisation to say which is more expensive.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting intersectionality there, actually, Ellie, because a lot of menopausal women who are neurodivergent find that is a really tricky time performance-wise. I know personally that was a point where I found it really difficult to kind of manage my performance. And I think it was because of undiagnosed neurodivergence. I did have my menopause diagnosed, but the brain fog then combined with everything else to just really affect how I felt in the workplace. And so I think that intersectionality is going to make a huge difference to neurodivergent women in the workplace.
Absolutely. And I think the engagement in that, I think because we've perhaps spoken about or known about the menopause for what seems to be longer than individuals who've spoken about neuro-inclusion, neurodiversity, businesses really are sort of on their journey to having menopause policies, having things in place to support, as you say, from an impacting point of view, that will only ever support individuals who are going through that. So it's a real positive thing. And they all connect somewhere along the line.
They do. And I'm really pleased that taboo is broken and that we can actually have a conversation about that and it be a workplace issue because of the number of people it's going to affect and the talent
Absolutely.
It's going to impact. Very important. Again, another whole podcast series, I think, around.
Absolutely. There's so many things that you could talk about and so many things that you could draw upon. It's really difficult sometimes to just focus on that one. But I think all the stuff that we've covered today is really, really key.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to the close, I think. I'd like to ask, is there one takeaway that you'd like people to remember about neurodiversity in the workplace from your perspective, both as a lawyer and a trainer?
Absolutely. Inclusion's a journey. I can't tell you how important that is. It's not a checklist. I think too many people think about it as a checklist, tick box exercise.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a journey that we have to go on. As I said right at the start, the law sets the baseline and it sets the framework that we have to follow. But if we truly want an inclusive workplace, we need to move beyond the compliance to actually courtesy, compassion, culture change. I'm back in there with my C's.
You are. You've introduced some new ones. Compassion. I like this.
Neurodiversity isn't just about risk management. It's about rethinking what good leadership, communication and performance really looks like in today's workplace, not in last year's or the year before. It's thinking about it in today's mindset. So that's my final point.
I love that final point. The compassion that you talked about is really important, and the journey and the fact that it changes year to year. So I loved how you brought that out at the end, Ellie. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Anything else that you'd like to add? You have an opportunity.
I think we've mentioned so many important topics today, and we've spoken about both the legal framework, but also bringing that human approach into the way in which we're managing our staff and we're managing a neurodivergent person. And I can't tell you how true that is and how important that is for organisations to not just think about that legal framework, but think holistically around actually, how can we support this person and what value do they add to us where we want to retain, we want to keep. And I use that word thrive because for me, that's a really important one. I want to see them flourish. I want to see them grow. And I actually want to be a part of that. And maybe that's because I do have that empathy. And maybe it's because I do like to see people succeed. But That is really, really important for me. So I suppose from my perspective, if there are businesses out there that need support, that need help, that want to have further conversations around anything that you and I have talked about today, Kate, on whether that be training for managers, whether that be for policies, procedures, how they move out of that legalistic approach to that more humane side of things, just get in touch.
Where can they find you, Ellie? Where would they be able to get in touch with you?
Oh gosh, I'm sure my face pops up everywhere, but
It will now.
It will now. Obviously, you can Google Bhayani Law. You can contact us through our Contact Us page. You can contact me directly via LinkedIn through searching for Ellie Hand. You can come to our offices if you'd like a warm cup of tea or coffee.
Oh, you are so welcoming.
There's no harm.
You do lots of events.
We have lots of events. Keep an eye out for our events. We do free events. We do charitable events all the time. So just keep an eye on things. Individuals can sign up to our newsletter, which again is a really informative document that gives you information on upcoming changes in the law, but also the hot topics that we're seeing at the minute when it comes to HR and that cultural shift and that change in organisation. So sign up to the newsletter, find me on LinkedIn, pop in for a coffee, whatever you'd prefer.
I'm going to take you up on that one for sure.
You have to test my skills.
Ellie, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us about neurodiversity in the workplace and so much more. And I'm sure there was lots of things in there that people were able to take away and maybe make a difference today. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for bringing such an important topic to light and actually addressing it and not shying away from the topic and allowing businesses to hear what they can and cannot do. So thank you for putting it on and obviously asking me to take part.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com, where you can explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership tools, models, and the very latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.